What's happening, everyone? This is Zach Edwards with another episode of the Adventure Box podcast, brought to you by the game Historical Conquest. Now, you've already heard it a few times. Historical Conquest is a game where you basically add fun and history, and while you're just having fun, you're actually learning history, just by happenstance. It's a byproduct of just playing a really fun game. It's a game that's a mixture of like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh! Magic, and with the gameplay of Risk, but where all the cards are historically based. People, places, events, documents, so on and so forth. Now, let's go on to what we're doing today. As I said last week, this is the final week of Egypt. This is the last week we're going to be talking about Egypt, sharing the things about Egypt. So it's going to get really exciting because this is where the Greeks are there right now. As we told you last week, Alexander the Great had just taken over Egypt. He kicked out the Persians, became the liberator, and everyone was happy, right? Not exactly. So right now I'm editing our curriculum for next month, the ancient Israel. And one thing that we learned is very interesting. There was a difference for the Greeks, and there's a difference between the Romans when it comes to them taking over or controlling Israel, or I guess should say Judea and the Jews, and Egypt. Now here's what happens. I'll give it really quick, as quick as possible. So you have, without going into everything, you have the Persians that basically liberate Judea and all the Jews from Babylon, and basically give them free reign. It's like, please, we want to rule you by letting you be free. Now you still have to pay us tribute, and we're going to still take the credit of you being part of our empire, but we want you to have free reign over anywhere in our lands, anywhere within the Persian Empire. And the Jews are like, that's great. And they can basically do what they want when it comes to their religion. They're actually given money and support to go back into Judea and build up Jerusalem, including the temple. And that's when the second temple is built. Now, at this point, you then have the Persians also go down into Egypt. They basically take over, and they don't give it as many rights. I mean, they do have rights, but I think the Egyptians are just sick and tired of everyone controlling them, because they had the kingdom of Cush, they had Libya, they had the Syrians come in, then they had the Persians come in. Now they have the Greeks come in? I mean, seriously, can you have independence? That's what they were asking for. But no, they could not. So the Greeks come in after the Persians, basically kick the Persians out, and the Greeks take over. Why was it so important for me to tell you about this? Well, here's the divide. Here's the reason why it was different on how the Israelites, or the Jews felt about the Greeks and the Persians, and the Egyptians with the Greeks and the Persians and the Greeks. So Israel, Greeks are in there. They believe in the Hellenistic style, or Hellenistic society. And that's when they're going to create this great civilization in Judea, where everyone has to worship their God. Not the Jewish God, not the Hebrews God, the Jews' God, the Greek gods, multiple gods. They put up altars of Zeus, and then you had to bow down to them. You had all these other things going in. So they did not like this. This is actually where you get the Maccabees come in and try to overthrow the Greeks, when the Greeks were basically forcing them to serve other gods that they did not believe in. Okay, now go down to Egypt. So Egypt, remember, they have many gods. They have Isis. They have Amun-Ra. They have a whole bunch of them. And then you have the Greeks that come up and say, hey, you have to worship our gods too. Hellenistic. Well, then they're like, well, they sound pretty close to ours, so if we just change our people's names and worship yours, sure, we could do that. Now, again, the Egyptians did not actually worship the gods of the Greeks. They still had their own gods. But because they believed in polytheism, worshiping multiple gods, there wasn't much of a change. There wasn't much of a fight. But when you have the Jews and the Greeks, you have polytheism versus monotheism. And so there's a lot of butting heads there. So that being said, that's what's happening with the Greeks. So in Egypt, you have some people that are quite happy with the Greeks. The pharaohs, when Alexander the Great came in, he called himself a pharaoh. Then every pharaoh after him was a Greek. So if someone says that Cleopatra was black, they're wrong. And the reason why they're wrong is because it was Greek rule, and she was descended from Greeks. So she was actually Greek. She wasn't Egyptian. She wasn't a Cushite. She wasn't Libyan. She wasn't anywhere from Africa. She was actually from Greece, which is Europe. Now, Cleopatra, which we'll get into in just a minute, is well known for her beauty. One of the most beautiful women in the world at that point. Now, this is where beauty can get you in a lot of trouble. Okay, so let's go into, and I say that with just, okay. You have these three people. Actually, let's go a little bit further back. Around, 60 BC, you have what we call the first triumvirate. Trium being three, variate being rule. So ruled by three. So in this time, you have three people, not these three, but three people. You have Julius Caesar, or who will become Julius Caesar. You have Pompey, who is a Roman general. And you have one other one that I can't remember, but we're not doing Roman history right now. We're doing Greek. So what happens? Well, there's a civil war, and Pompey is kicked out. So he goes against Julius Caesar in a world war. Pompey flees to Egypt. Now, at this point, Egypt is its own sovereign nation. Whoops. Let me go back. I'm going to show you this image later on, but it's its own sovereign nation. And this is great. The Greeks are very happy with this. But because they know, sovereign nation, I shouldn't say sovereign nation, because they're controlled by the Greeks. They are their own. They're not Roman at this point. So they're owned and controlled by Greece. Okay, so now you have Pompey who goes down in there, and the Greeks are like, you know what? I'm not going to make Caesar mad at us any more than he already is, us being Greeks. And so we're going to side with him. And they basically assassinate Pompey, send his body back up to Caesar and say, here you go. That's when Caesar becomes Caesar. So Julius Caesar was not Caesar until after his other two cohorts were killed. Now, after the two cohorts were killed, you have, again, Pompey and the other person, I can't remember his name. After they're killed, then you have the whole Senate attack Julius Caesar and assassinate him, and he's dead. So Julius Caesar is now dead. Okay, so now Julius Caesar, before he dies, he actually takes a trip down to Egypt and becomes embroiled in a Egyptian dynasty struggle between Ptolemy the 13th and Cleopatra the 7th. So there's other Cleopatras, but we're talking about just one Cleopatra right now. So at this point, Caesar, before he dies, before he's killed, Caesar supports Cleopatra, and she is restored to the throne now. And Julius Caesar forces Ptolemy the 13th in the Battle of the Nile, and who then gets drowned while fleeing. So Ptolemy flees and drowns in the Nile. So that's 47 BC. All that happened in that year. So Cleopatra takes over control over Egypt, except she's Greek, not Roman. So they've given her that because they don't want to be able to control it right now. It's just not on their purview. But Cleopatra needs to be able to give Rome support. Okay, so now Ptolemy is gone. He's dead. And you have Cleopatra ruling. Now, in 44 BC is when Julius Caesar is assassinated. And basically, there's a power struggle that's happening in Rome. And this is when they create the second triumvirate. These guys. You have Octavian, who is supposedly the heir to Julius Caesar, except he's not actually related to him. Then you have Marc Antony, pretty good looking man there. Actually, they're all pretty good looking people. I know pretty good looking because yeah, there you go. I'm pretty good looking. That's what I'm trying to say. Anyways, okay. Then you have this guy right here, Lepidus. The first thing that Octavian does is after he gives the rule of, well, Octavian takes over the rule of the north. Basically, anything in Italy, or what would be Italy, France, Spain, that all becomes under the purview of Octavian. Lepidus gets Carthage. And Carthage is, when we do Roman history, you're going to hear a lot about Carthage because they're the ones that actually go west up through the Straits of Gibraltar, basically where water enters into the Mediterranean from the Atlantic Ocean, climbs through Spain and France and goes into Italy trying to take over. That's a long trek. But they had elephants, they had other mercenaries, they had all these different people, and they got their butts kicked, and they went limping home back to Carthage when Rome came down and took over Carthage. Well, you kick the bee's nest, you're going to get stung. So Carthage is now under Lepidus. The east side of the Mediterranean is all under Marc Antony, except for where Cleopatra was put into power by Caesar. And so here's an interesting thing. While Marc Antony is down there, he goes and has a meeting with Cleopatra and falls in love with her. So they fall in love, and it's okay at that point. So it's 44 BC is when Julius Caesar is assassinated. Cleopatra and Marc Antony have this like 10-year love affair, and they create allies. They become allies romantically and politically, but also militarily. Okay, then you also have, again, Julius Caesar. Sorry, not Julius Caesar. You have Octavian. Sorry. You have Octavian, who basically says, okay, that's fine. You guys stay down there. I'll be up here. Now, because Octavian just took over Lepidus's land and exiled him, he could not turn around and automatically take on Marc Antony because Marc Antony had a lot of support. But what was happening during that same time? Well, over in Judea, the Jews were, they had some independence at this point. And, well, no, sorry, they had independence up to a point. One of the kings died, and the two sons created a civil war. They actually brought Pompey in to settle it. And Pompey's like, yes, sir, I will do that. Not a problem. And he goes in with his army and takes over Judea. But he puts one of the brothers in control of the land. So Pompey, at that point, this is again before he's killed, he goes back to Rome and says, hey, I've done all these great things. Julius Caesar, not too happy with him. They create a civil war, and that's where they run out. Well, because Pompey is not there to control it, basically Judea gets its freedom for a little bit. Actually, funny enough, during that time, Egypt comes up and attacks them at one point. Now, again, these are Roman lands. So when Marc Antony comes in, he sees that Egypt is falling apart, that it has its big struggles. But there's one person that actually worked under the brother that was put into power. Now, It wasn't him, it's actually his father. So his father worked for this other person. And then when his father dies, uh, this man tries to get into power. His name was Herod the Great, and he was pushed out. So Herod runs up, and this is the Parthians try to take over Judea for a time. And we're going to go over this when we go to ancient Israel. So Herod runs up to Rome and says, I need your help, Senate. I need your help to get my country back, and I'll do whatever you need to get it back. Begging, whatever. And the Senate says, sure. Now it's Marc Antony's side, so you're going to have to talk to him and get an army together. Because though that we're the Senate, the Octavian has control of the whole army, and he's not going to be supplying you with basically anything. You have what you have, and that's all you have. So Marc Antony's like, okay, fine. So he goes down to Cleopatra, who he's in love with, and says, hey, could we gather some troops and help Herod take over Israel? Sorry, take over Judea? Cleopatra's like, I will support that. So they get a massive money together. They fund this army, and they go in and take over Israel. It's about 30 BC, just a little bit before 30 BC. Probably like 34 BC, maybe 34, 35. And so at this point, Rome loves them. They just took over another province. They just solidified a moneymaker for Rome. The Senate's happy with them. But guess who's not? That would be Octavian. Octavian is getting jealous. Okay, so you have Marc Antony, who just received financial support from his love interest, the most beautiful woman in the world. You have, he is now getting support from all over Rome because he just took over Judea. He's got all these things going for him. And then you have the guy that's supposed to be, I'm supposed to be the popular one. Me. Give me the popularity. You have Octavian, who basically has a hissy fit. And he goes down and attacks Cleopatra. But not directly her. He's on his way down, and Marc Antony and Cleopatra join forces, get their army together, and fight back. And sadly, in that fight, Cleopatra, Marc Antony, they both have to run off to Egypt. They have to make their way to Egypt. Well, they were hoping to regroup, but that didn't stop Octavian from coming down the coast and walking straight into Egypt, taking it over. Marc Antony, August 1st, 30 BC, commits suicide because he knows he's going to be tortured. Octavian was very upset with him. And after his last stand, he's like, I'm not doing it. And so he commits suicide. Shortly afterwards, Caesar, I shouldn't say called him Caesar yet. Octavian becomes Caesar because it's not the triumvirate. It is now a singular monarchy again, ruled by another Caesar. You had Julius Caesar, now you have Caesar Augustus. Caesar Augustus comes in and takes Cleopatra for his wife. Wow, that's a stab. Ouch. So your love interest gets whacked by, he commits suicide because he's going to get whacked by this other guy. And now this popular guy, me, I want power. He comes in and takes Cleopatra as a wife. Cleopatra doesn't like that and soon commits suicide of her own. So possibly by a venomous snake. They're not 100% sure exactly how she did it. But now Cleopatra's gone and Egypt is officially Roman province. That was pretty easy. Get rid of the rulers and there you go. It becomes yours. So the Ptolemaic dynasty, which was basically the Greek dynasty, is now gone. And Rome rules Egypt. Yeah, Rome rules Egypt. They administer it. Octavian, who's Augustus Caesar, not Caesar Augustus, Augustus Caesar, annexes Egypt. as property of the Roman Empire and puts soldiers in there and directly integrates it directly into the Roman Senate's provincial system. So the Senate actually controls the province. They have to go to the Senate if they want anything to be done. Now, in 23 BC, 7 years later, Augustus establishes a stable administration in Egypt. It takes him 7 years to do so, and imposes Roman rule and military presence throughout the country. Alexandria, also already a significant cultural and economic hub, becomes the key city of the Roman Empire. Everyone loves Alexandria. It is so desired by like everyone. And this is where they actually blend Egyptian, Greek, and Roman influence. So this is actually something to say, because I think we talked to you about this last time. We talked about how when you have a power come in, a new leader come in to almost any civilization, what is the first thing they do? There's two things that they try to do. Oh, sorry, I forgot these pictures. Before I tell you those two things that they do, here are 3 coins from the Roman Second Triumvirate era. Marc Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus. Look at that. Marc Antony is so much bigger than Octavian. Shows a little thing. Yeah, never mind. You have 3 different statues of these same people. You have when Lepidus was exiled during the Second Triumvirate. And this is basically the Roman rule around 30 BC. So at this point, Rome actually controls a darn large portion of the whole Mediterranean area. Basically, every piece of land around it, minus the pink, are controlled by Rome. Okay, so, and here's Cleopatra in hieroglyphics. And this was actually supposed to be where Augustus Caesar shows his power by marrying Cleopatra. Cleopatra is showing her care for the slaves and the people that were enslaved by the Romans, the Egyptians that were enslaved. And so that was it. So by this time, we're not going there yet. So that is the story of how Rome came into Egypt and took it over. Now, as I said before, going back to what was really important, what is the 2 things that any new ruler does when he takes over command of a new location, a new civilization? He changes 2 things. 1, he changes the history. He wants to show how great he is and how horrible the previous group was. And why is that? Think about history. You teach history to all your people. Those that are elders pass along the history. Those that are young learn it and then pass it on as well. If you can change the history in their history books, and you can basically force everyone else to memorize your history, then at that point, you become the victor, you become the liberator, you become everything that you want to, because you just changed the history books. If someone comes in and says, hey, I want X, Y, and Z to be changed, if you're the new ruler, that's what it is. They wipe out whole buildings to rewrite the history. They'll repaint whole walls. They'll recarve whole walls just to make the history suitable to you. Which is why we have the archaeologists that go back further, as far enough as possible, to get the truth out. But the problem is, a lot of times, our history is a mixture of fact and the biases of whoever ruled at that time. If during their rule, they say, and it could be near the end of their rule, they say, you know what, I don't like this thing, change it. Well, they are dictators, so they change it. They have full control over the system, so they change it. And so all of a sudden, because of that, we have a hard time sometimes as historians to actually distinguish between what is fact and what is the bias of the people. This is why any book, any record that you find have the possibility of being corrupted. So everything that we hear in history has to be taken with a grain of salt of, wait a minute, maybe this didn't happen. But you can't say whether it did or did not because you were not there. And all you can go out on is what you can find in archaeology and a hope that they can actually figure out what they were actually talking about. I'll give you one example. Go back into Egypt in history. There was Amun-Ra, and there is Aten. Remember, there was Akhenaten, who was the translation, the image of Aten. Now, Akhenaten was the one that basically said, we're not going to do polytheism anymore. We're going to do monotheism. And we're going to, and here's the point I'm going to make, we're going to worship the sun god. Now, archaeologists today and historians like to say that it was the sun disk god. I'm sorry, but most of these people had idols, and they didn't say the calf's the god. It's the representation of the god that they're talking about. So if they say, oh, they worshipped a disc, no, they didn't worship a disc. I mean, that's most likely. Again, I'm not there, so I can't exactly say. But logically, what my mind would say is, no, that was a representation of their god, and so that's what they believed. So again, archaeologists and historians and everyone that puts together history only has it put together as well as they can. Because we were not there, all we can go off of is the records. The records are not always right because the records are usually based on those that were in power to write those records unless they were hidden up during a time. And then the question is, were those ones corrupted by those that were writing them? We don't know. Again, as historians, we do the best that we can. And this is the story that we have for you today. I appreciate you joining us on this Adventure Box podcast. Look for, now today's Tuesday, look for Thursday when we talk about the two largest religions, and actually I think it's still two largest religions population-wise in the world, and how they both fought over Egypt in completely different ways. But we'll talk to you more on Thursday. So stay tuned for that. Again, that would be, I'm going to hold off on even saying who they are. You probably could figure it out, but wait till Thursday and you'll get more information. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will catch you next time. Take care. Bye-bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.